Are you ready? Please. And
why not sit up?
Hello? Yes.
One second. Please. She's going to refer to the important thing.
Is the draft that you have it in this booklet? She's going to refer to that, or she has another draft?
Another one.
This one, which was executed this morning.
This morning. So this is the final one which she is going to refer to. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. I did not prepare for this, so apologies if it might not be as organized as if I had. My name is Anke Santens. I am a partner with White & Case, and I represented the member federations in the two CAS cases that you all know about. Both of those cases, to some measure, resulted out of unclarities in the rules, and so I just, before I go into them, did want to confirm Macro's statements that the rules are much clearer now. There will be much less confusion and much less cause for debate. So even though the rules contain provisions that I personally had some difficulty with during the negotiations, in the end I think it is really a good proposal that will provide for much better rules. So let's first talk about CAS, because that's the provision that has been raised. The main idea in the CAS provision is that if there is a dispute within FIDE, and a member federation or a player or anyone else wants to fight that dispute, they first have to fight the dispute within the organization. So they have to bring it to the bodies within the organization, and only if FIDE has reached a final decision, then can they appeal outside to the CAS. Normally, you would have to bring your appeal first to the presidential board, the executive board, and then the General Assembly, and only then can you go to CAS. But we have put a provision in there that if that time delay would be so as to irreparably harm the interest of the party, then you can go to CAS after an executive board decision. You do not need to wait for the General Assembly. So that was a very important point for FIDE that is now in the draft. The other important provisions in it are that if you have a dispute that under the FIDE rules needs to go to the Ethics Commission, and the Ethics Commission issues a decision, then you can appeal that decision immediately to the CAS. You do not have to first go to the General Assembly, which makes perfect sense. This is a body that is constituted specifically for these types of disputes. They are the body that should issue FIDE's final opinion on an ethics issue, and then if you still disagree, you go to CAS. The other body from which you can immediately appeal to CAS is the so-called Electoral Commission, which I will give some more detail about later. This is an entirely new body that has been inserted now in Chapter 8 of the statutes, which has all the elected commissions in it. And the idea of the Electoral Commission is that in election years, this commission will be constituted and it will have two main tasks. One will be to verify the proxies, and the other one will be to decide any electoral disputes. And the new rules provide for a provision that if there is a dispute, an electoral dispute, you cannot bring it to CAS before the end of the election. What's the idea behind that? If there is an electoral dispute about, for instance, one or two proxies, but the election result is so wide, then it's a waste of time really for everybody to first go to CAS. It's better to have the election, and then after the election, when you see the result, you can see whether the one or two proxies actually make a difference. If they don't, why would you go fight them? So that is something that FIDE had asked for, and that I personally think makes a lot of sense. So that's also in here. Now, on costs, the structure is as follows. If a member federation or a player or really any party sues FIDE at the CAS under Article 13, and that person loses, then that person, then there's a provision now that tells the panel at CAS, so the three arbitrators that will decide the case, to grant FIDE the right to its reasonable, I emphasize that, legal fees and expenses incurred in proportion to FIDE's degree of success. Let me repeat that. Let me give you an example. So, a member federation brings a case against FIDE. The member federation, FIDE disputes jurisdiction, but in the end FIDE wins on the merits. If the tribunal would view the jurisdictional fight at, let's say, 40% of the fight, and the merits fight at, let's say, 60% of the fight, then the provision would say that the member federation needs to pay 60% of the reasonable legal fees and expenses of FIDE. What does that mean? Reasonable means that you should not, you as a member federation, should not have to pay unnecessary expenses that FIDE engages into in the case. If FIDE engages 10 lawyers and does all kinds of papers and lots of documents and exaggerates the way they try to defend the proceedings, then the arbitral panel will be able to say, we think you could have won this case with less resources. We're not going to tell the member federation that they have to pay you for these resources that we consider are exaggerated. So that would be in the judgment of the three arbitrators, and that makes sense that the same person decides all issues. So they look at jurisdiction, they look at the merits, and then at the end of the case, when they make their appreciation of who really won and lost here, they will then also decide on the costs. Now, to go to the issue of 200,000 euros that was discussed, so the idea that's now in the statutes that was one, I think, of the most important provisions to FIDE is that if a member federation brings a case against FIDE, first of all, you have to disclose your funds. And second of all, because of this rule that I have just explained, where if a federation would lose, FIDE wants to be sure that there would be funds there for the federation to pay these costs. FIDE wanted some form of guarantee on costs. We have agreed that the money would not have to be put up up front. That was a negotiated element, the bank guarantee. And we also negotiated the amount, which ultimately was 200,000 euros. I should also say, back to the cost provision for a second, and the security for cost, the cost provision is mutual. So if FIDE would bring a CAS case against an entity in the a member federation, for instance, and FIDE would lose, the same rule would apply. So it's a mutual rule. It's not just if you sue FIDE, it's also if FIDE would be the claimant in a proceeding. So I think that covers it on CAS. Should there be questions before I move on?
Go on and if there are questions.
A major part of the discussion has been focused on electoral elections and anything surrounding that, proxies and the provisions in the electoral regulations. So let me go through some of the main points. On proxies, there's a new provision which now sits in the electoral regulations but can only be amended by the General Assembly by a simple majority. And on proxies, the rule is now very clear. Should I run through the detail of the rule? Proxies? Okay. So we have a more stringent regime in election years and a less stringent regime in non-election years, because that makes sense. Proxies are less sensitive in non-election years than they are in election years. So in a non-election year, and now, for those who would like to follow the text, it's the 4th page in the annex, in bold, 5 proxies. I should also explain that all the changes that have been made after you received the agenda and the annexes on the website are all in bold, so that it's easy for you to see what was changed from the last FIDE draft, which was published on the website. So in election years, if we look at the first paragraph, each member federation must now inform FIDE of the name of its delegate at the latest 4 weeks before the opening session of the General Assembly. If the federation does not communicate anything, then the delegate will be the name that FIDE has on its records. And FIDE will then publish on its website a complete list of all the delegates the day after this 4-week deadline that I mentioned, so that everybody has it very clear which delegate will be the official delegate of the Federation at the General Assembly. Then, of course, a delegate can assign a proxy. There had been some discussion about whether a proxy should be assigned only within a member federation, but that ultimately we agreed not to put that in. So how does it work? A proxy must be can be signed either by the delegate or the president, or sent. It doesn't need to be necessarily signed. So if the delegate sends an email with a proxy attached, or the president sends an email with the proxy attached, that will be accepted as a valid proxy, because we know not every federation necessarily has a scanning machine. So in that case, if there's a cover email that clearly shows the delegate or the president, that will be accepted. The priority has changed. The statutes used to say president highest priority, then delegate. Because the delegate is really the official representative towards FIDE of the organization, we have changed this priority so that the delegate will be the most important. So if, let's say, if FIDE receives 2 proxies, one from the delegate, one from the president, it will be the proxy that is delivered by the delegate that will control. So the proxies must be sent to the Secretariat in the period after this list of delegates has been published on the website, which, as I said, will be the day after 4 weeks before the General Assembly, and 2 weeks before the General Assembly. So there will be a 2-week time frame in which, if a federation wants to grant a proxy, it needs to send the proxy to FIDE. This is important because if you do not send in your proxy by the deadline, the proxy will not be accepted. So that's a change from the past. Then FIDE will close the register, and the Electoral Commission will get together, verify all of the information that has been submitted, and will notify the FIDE Secretariat of the final list of who can vote. So for the federations that have not given a proxy, the list will have the delegate. For the federation that has assigned a valid proxy, the person on the list will be the proxy. You can only assign a proxy to a delegate of another federation. So in practice, if somebody from France assigns a proxy to Germany, the list will then say for France the name of the German delegate. This will be done 1 week before the General Assembly. So 2 weeks before you send your proxy, the Electoral Commission then has a week to look at everything, and then 1 week before the General Assembly, the Secretariat will publish this list. Now, the rule has been maintained that every representative is entitled to every delegate is entitled to represent, besides his own federation, only one additional federation. So if a delegate has received more than 2 proxies, then he will need to, or she will need to reassign one of the extra proxies to another delegate. That will be done after the list that I mentioned was published, and that can be done until 2 days before the opening of the General Assembly. Another change that can still be made is that that the delegate can assign his right to vote to the president of the federation. So if there was no proxy, the delegate is listed, but the federation, for some reason, the president, the delegate ultimately can't make it, the president comes, then the delegate will still be able to allow the president to vote. This also must be communicated to FIDE 2 days before the opening of the General Assembly. And all these, the 2 changes that I mentioned that could happen now, either a reassignment of a proxy because one has too many, or a change from the delegate to the president, that will be published at the latest by 1700, 5 p.m. on the day before the opening of the General Assembly. So then, at the opening of the General Assembly, the Electoral Commission will report on the proxies and answer any questions and comments. And the Electoral Commission decisions will be final. And maybe I should, well, will be final. So if anybody has a dispute with any of those decisions, that dispute would be brought to CAS after the election. That's the way it is structured. And then the elections are held, and after elections, as you can see in point B, proxies can be assigned and reassigned again anytime. The former system where changes could be made in a more flexible manner will still apply in non-election years, and it will also apply in election years immediately after the election, but for the election itself, the system will be the more strict system that I have just explained. So let me now move on to the Electoral Commission. I had already mentioned it. This is a new body. It will be composed as follows, not for 2014, I will get into that in a moment, but the rule for any elections after 2014 will be that the Electoral Commission consists of 5 members. The chair will be the chair of the Constitutional Commission. So next time in 2014, when you elect the chair of the Constitutional Commission, you will at the same time be electing the chair of the Electoral Commission. The other 4 members will be elected by the continents. Each continent will elect a member to the Electoral Commission at its last annual assembly that will be held before the election year General Assembly. And of course, the Electoral Commission will decide by majority. Now for 2014, the agreement has been that there will be an extraordinary General Assembly next year, 2013, in Antalya, at which all the continents will also hold an assembly meeting. The continents will all elect their representatives to the Commission. Sorry, hold on one second. And the chairman will be elected in the General Assembly. Now, we also needed for that extraordinary General Assembly a committee that would verify proxies, etc., which cannot, of course, yet be this electoral commission because we haven't elected it yet. So it will be composed of myself and 2 members that will be appointed by FIDE. Other changes to the electoral regulations are that to run for a presidential ticket to run, nominations must be received by 5 member federations, but the federation does not need to include the federation of which the people on the ticket are members. So if you have a ticket composed of 6 members, including one of the United States Chess Federation, there doesn't need to be a nomination by the United States Chess Federation. The ticket can be nominated by other federations. And the nomination decision will be communicated by FIDE to FIDE by the federation's president. And if there are internal disputes within the member federations, FIDE is entitled to rely on the communication of the president. So if the president sends in a nomination and afterwards somebody says the president didn't have the authority to do that, FIDE is entitled to rely on what the president told them. If there are such disputes within the member federations, they basically will need to be resolved before the nomination. And this is a provision that is in here just because FIDE cannot go and check in every country the rules and regulation of the country. They need some communication that they can rely on, and if federations have internal disputes, as I said, the idea is that they should be solved within the federation before the communication is made to FIDE. I should also say, once the nomination is made, it is final. It cannot be withdrawn. Even if there's a new president, he cannot now make a new nomination. One nomination and it stands. There's also been an agreement on the number of vice presidents. FIDE wanted a higher number of vice presidents, so the agreement that has been made is that the president, the newly elected president, can propose the number of vice presidents to the General Assembly with a... Let me backtrack. There will be 2 vice presidents running on the ticket. Then the president will be able to nominate, to appoint really 5 more, and the General Assembly, let me do that again. So 2 vice presidents on the presidential ticket. The president can appoint a certain number, I'll get into it, can appoint a certain number of vice presidents, and the General Assembly will be able to elect the same number of vice presidents. And how will this work? The president, the newly elected president, will propose a number which will be between 3 and 5, minimum 3, maximum 5. So if the president asks for 4, and that's what the General Assembly approves, then 4 will also be elected. It will be the same number. And the candidates that the president proposes for his positions are subject to the confirmation of the General Assembly. So it works a bit like in the United States. The president can submit a name. If the General Assembly approves of the name, that person becomes the candidate. If the General Assembly disapproves of the name, the president can propose a new name, and this process would need to be repeated until a name is proposed that is accepted by the General Assembly. To run for elected vice president, one will need to be nominated by at least 3 delegates or proxies, so by 3 member federations. Each federation is entitled to nominate only 1 candidate, and for the 5 elected vice presidents, so the 5 or the 3, 4, or 5 elected vice presidents, they will not be able to be from the same country. All 5 will need to be from different countries. Okay, I think that was the main part of this.
Thank you. there is any question for Ms. Sang, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was privileged to attend some of the State Youth Commission meetings, so I'm privileged to know more than probably a lot of delegates. However, I'm still lost in those last moment changes, and I have two questions. One is regarding this bank guarantee to CAS. Is it proven that CAS will be willing to give a priori reasonable costs to provide a bank guarantee? Because if it does, after the hearing and after the verdict, there is no point of bank guarantee because that's already too late. And that's one question. And the second question, you mentioned about the split verdict, when 60%, 40%. And you said that if it is 60%, 40%, then the suing federation has to reimburse reasonable cost of FIDE, 60% of reasonable cost of FIDE. But does it also mean that FIDE reimburses the suing federation at 40% or not? Thank you.
Thomas, I didn't fully understand the first question. Sorry.
The question with bank guarantee regarding suing at CAS. The bank guarantee is normally given a priori as a secure money for the FIDE costs.
Yes.
So, and the provision and what you said is that it is determined by CAS what reasonable cost will be. So I'm asking whether CAS will be willing a priori, prior to hearings, prior to verdict, determine what reasonable cost could be that suing federation would know how big the bank guarantee should be. Thank you.
So the decision will be made by CAS. So when if a member federation brings a case against FIDE, FIDE will, in one of its first submissions, point to this provision and say this provides that a bank guarantee for the reasonable cost must be put up. Please decide the number and order the federation to put up this money. So the decision will be up to CAS. If the tribunal is already appointed, it will be the tribunal probably deciding this. But because, as I said, this will be one of the first requests that FIDE will make, it is likely to be the president of the appeals decision at CAS that will make this decision.
Okay, so it will be made at the first hearing then, and the CAS will be willing to do it, right? Because it's kind of a priori. You never know when you start the case, and knowing lawyers, they can,
they will be
suing forever. So
they will be
skyrocketing.
Yes, they will be willing to do this, and there will be submissions about this, because I presume that FIDE in every case will ask for $200,000 or euros, and the lawyers for the opposing party will try to negotiate, to argue that down. That there will be an exchange about that, and the court can grant anything up to 200,000. Yes, the second question. It's a very good question. And I have to admit, to my shame, that I'm going to have to think about this, about the mechanics, for 5 minutes after the questions are over, if that's okay. These cost decisions get complicated, so I have to reserve my answer on that.
No, please. Please.
Yes, of course.
Yes, given that I was involved in the drafting of this document, particularly after the meetings Monday and Wednesday, and probably I can answer one of these points. But the first point is a condition for the arbitration clause. So this has to be clear. For this reason, it's possible for the CAS to decide, and have to decide before any decision on the merit of the court case. about the second point, well, we have to distinguish between claims and counterclaims. So the mechanism is exactly this one. So if someone submits a counterclaims, they have to be responsible for these counterclaims. So if, for example, at the end, the CAS decided to dismiss both claims and the